And what the police do is they separate us out into two separate rooms. And they give us this payoff matrix that you see before you right now. And let me walk you through the payoff matrix so we all understand it. And keep in mind, I'm person A, you're person B. Now let's say I cooperate. When I say I cooperate, that means I cooperate with you. And I don't tell the police anything. I stay silent. And let's say you do the same. You also cooperate, and that means cooperating with me. You're not going to tell the police anything. Now, if that happens, I get 2 years in jail. And you get 2 years in jail. I mean, keep in mind, we've been caught red-handed. Let's go through another scenarios. Let's say I actually defect, and defect is a game theory term. What it means basically in this game is I'm going to rat you out. I'm going to tell the police everything. And the defection, what it refers to is I'm defecting on you. I'm no longer working with you. Okay. Now I'm working against you, basically. I'm defecting. So I tell the police everything. But let's say you still cooperate. You're going to be meaning you're not going to tell the police anything. You're cooperating with the partnership. And that means we're over here in this quadrant right here. And if that's the case, I'm walking out of there scot-free, no time. You're going to get stuck with 10 long years in jail. And so you can see how this payoff matrix works for no matter which way we go. All right. So now let's play the game. Now keep in mind, I'm person A, you're person B. Let's see, which one shall I go with first? All right, let's do this. Let's say you're very confident that I'm going to rat you out. I'm going to spill the beans and I'm going to tell the police everything they want. And in fact, you're confident I'll tell the police everything they want and more. And if that's the case, what's the most rational thing for you to do? So in other words, I'm defecting.
Confess.
To confess. So yeah, because if you confess, you're going to get 5 years. But you know what? That 5 years is better than 10 years, right? And so the most rational thing to do is to rat me out as well. All right, let's play the game again. This time it's going to be a different scenario. Let's say you're very confident. I'm going to stay silent. Then I'm not going to say anything at all. I'm not going to be confessing. So this time I'm over here. I'm cooperating. And if that's the case, what's the most rational thing for you to do? Just yell it out.
Defect.
Yeah, to confess, right? Because if you confess, you get out scot-free. 0 years. That's nice. Myself, I'm going to get stuck with 10 long years in jail. But for you, 0. That is really nice. Now, did you notice that no matter what I do, whichever choice I went with, the most rational thing for you to do was the same? It was always to defect. It's always to rat me out. And excuse me. And this is why game theorists and economists as well study this game, because they try to figure out, well, how do you ever get somebody to cooperate with another person, even if it means sacrificing something of themselves? Because by and large, people don't. They look out for themselves as opposed to us. Okay. The dilemma they're talking about in the prisoner's dilemma, the prisoner's dilemma is, who am I looking out for? Am I looking out for me, or am I looking out for us? And by the way, you are part of that us. And so the question is it the us you look out for, or is it the me you look out for? Most everybody looks out for the me, myself. Screw the us, right? They'll look out for me. And so these scholars try to figure out, well, how do you get people to sacrifice themselves for the good of the collective? Okay, the good of the us. And they spend years studying this. And they have very different variations of the game to see if they can't tweak the game such that you can get people to actually cooperate with one another. And I can tell you, over the decades, multiple decades that people have been studying this, there really isn't been a solution yet. Okay. There's one strategy that has some promise. It's called a tit for tat strategy. You may have heard about it because it's been in the news as of late. The tit for tat strategy is if you play this game that we just did repeatedly, and you can actually get to a steady state of cooperation if you just mirror the other side. And they call this strategy a tit for tat strategy. You do what the other side does. So on the first round, if I cooperate, and let's do defections first. On the first round, if I defect, on the second round, you should defect. And on the next round, if I cooperate, then on the following round, you should cooperate. And they call that tit for tat. And what they find is that people eventually get to a steady state of cooperating repeatedly over and over again. But even that game that strategy still has a slight problem, because what do you think happens on the very last round, the very last turn of that particular game? Now I'll just tell you. On that last round, both sides tend to defect, is what usually happens. But even that's not a perfect game to get people to cooperate. So people are still studying this prisoner's dilemma. But again, the dilemma is, who do you look out for? Do you look out for the me, or do you look out for the us? Well, of which you are part of that us.
So, Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
Incentivizing or negotiating amongst the two parties is not going to help?
Yeah, well, in this prisoner's dilemma game, there is no talking. So you just have to make the decisions. But yes, in real life, when you have these prisoner's dilemma, you usually try to talk it through. Okay. But even in real life, people still struggle with it. But the only way to really end these prisoner's dilemma in real life is to be able to talk with one another. Okay. And to somehow figure out, well, we're going to cooperate. Okay. And then you hope the other side actually follows through. But we'll come up with that one a little bit more shortly. So we're gonna still look into that same question. All right. So hold on to that and see if it's not answered until the end, near the end of the class. All right. Back to this prisoner's dilemma. All right. The dilemma. Is it me or us that we look out for? Now imagine if you play the prisoner's dilemma game. Hold on. Imagine if you play the prisoner's dilemma game with more than two people. Okay, it's not just me and you anymore. Now we have multiple people. And in fact, let's say we play that game with 4 people. That's what you did in the shark case. The shark case is a social dilemma. And so we'll take a look at those results. But when you have a prisoner's dilemma game, when you have more than 2 people, it then changes name. It becomes a social dilemma. The social dilemma is still a prisoner's dilemma, except it has more than 2 people. So this in-person PDG, what that is saying is a multi-person prisoner's dilemma game is what this refers to. And then that's when you have social dilemmas. Social dilemmas are considered to be riskier than a prisoner's dilemma because there's a lot more influence going on, inputs going on into the decisions. So let's take a look at Shark now. Let me walk you through the spreadsheet first before we start digging in here. Yeah, that's probably good. All right. So going across, we have all the roles, the large commercial, small commercial, recreational competitive, and then the rec tours, okay? And as an example, Ian is the large commercial in this first group. Ian is going to harvest 1,000 metric tons. Immediately following the how many metric tons Ian is going to harvest is Ian's NPV. Ian's making about 16.215 million for Ian's NPV. And that same sequence goes for each role. Okay, Daniel's small commercial harvested 650, and he's making 14.7 million as the NPV. And you can see that for everybody. At the very far end, reduce it. At the very far end, the second to the far right column, you have the total harvest. Now that's exactly what it sounds like. And just add up everybody's harvest. And for group one, that comes down to 2,950 metric tons. They're over harvesting. The shark will disappear. Total NPV is also similarly calculated. You just add up everybody's NPV, and that gets you the total NPV. In this case, it's about 66.5 million. Now, the reason this is a social dilemma, and so let me just say, we have two groups here who are coming at 2,500. And the reason it's a social dilemma, and a couple of you I know figured it out, probably more, that when you hit that harvest of a sustainable harvest, you maximize your group NPV. If you hit 2,500, the collective NPV, meaning everybody together, is maxed out at 70 million. When you over harvest, we'll just go up to here. The total NPV drops. Nonetheless, even though you over harvest, there will be people in that group who are doing very well. They may actually do exceptionally well, but as a collective, they do worse. Okay, so you have a choice. You can individually do well and you'll come out with a really nice NPV, or you can cooperate and hit the maximum collective NPV. What do you look out for? Is it me or is it us? Okay, same thing going on. Let me just clarify a few things in here too before we jump in. In group 4, there was nobody in this rec tours role. So I told group 4 in advance that rec tours was going to be cutting their harvest in half, and you could probably trust them. So that was 550 metric tons. In group 6, we had a person drop out of the class. Okay. And so this group did not work out. So no NPVs are calculated for this group because they only had 3 players. I will point out, just for kicks, that even with 3 players, they also over harvested. And Jasmine, is Jasmine here? All right, because Jasmine did not participate. She's still in the class, supposedly, so hopefully she's listening in. Did not participate with the group, and so I told this group to go ahead and count Jasmine for half of the harvest. And again, that's 550, just like here was 550. So that group knew Jasmine was going to do 550. Okay. And by the way, they both of these groups over harvested. All right. So we have 10 groups. Okay, 6 really. I'm sorry, no, 9 really if you discount 6. But I'm just going to say 10 groups. 2 hit 2,500, which means about 80% roughly are over harvesting. 20% actually pulled it in through the harvest. So by and large, the majority in here are looking out for themselves, not the collective, and that's okay. You may have your reasons, right? Because you get measured by NPV after all. But let me ask this. Are any groups here surprised? Like, did any group here think they were going to do 2,500 and then they come in and see the results and my gosh, you're over 2,500? Any surprises like that?
If I could speak for our group,
Yeah.
I believe we all kind of had an idea that because we were given the documentation that specified what our groups needed to do to sustain themselves, we had a inclination that we had motives to harvest more than what we anticipated or what we calculated to harvest.
Right. So this is you right here as rec tours on group 6, right?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So you sort of had a thought that, you know what, you might be over harvesting. Was there somebody in particular you were a little worried about?
Me, in particular, no.
No.
I was basing it off of my document where I was told that you need this number to sustain yourself. And once we discussed, I'm pretty sure all of our estimates were completely different from one another. Uh, when we saw the number, we realized that we had to harvest a number that's less that wouldn't sustain ourselves. So I initially thought that, well, if we were going to submit a number, it's probably going to be something a little bit higher so we can have a better chance at sustaining ourselves.
Professor, this is
Sustaining
Santiago, and I'm
yourselves.
part of the same group.
Okay.
I was large commercial, and I'll call myself out here because when we met, my number was much lower.
How
To
lower?
get to that 2,500 harvest. However, after our meeting, I took a look at our NPV. I'm like, my NPV is way low, so I increased my number after we deliberated.
And I'm calling out myself as well. We agreed for my group to be 720, and then I, being alone, said, 720 is going to be not sustainable for my group. So maybe we can put a little bit more in if I had to choose a number.
Like 100 metric tons.
Yep.
Yeah. What about you, Santiago? How much extra did you harvest?
I think I was at 700
Okay.
when we discussed, and I increased about 200 tons.
Okay. All right. You 700 is about 200 tons. So 100 for Asif, 200 for Santiago. Shelby, did you come in? Did you put a few extra tons into your harvest as well? Are you here, Shelby? Okay. Well, this one is interesting because even with only 3 players, they over harvested. And if we did have that person still in the class, it probably would have been even more. But it was just 100 metric tons, 200 metric tons. Okay. And I have a feeling Shelby may have done the same. So so what did you think Shelby was going to be harvesting? Asif and Santiago.
I was going to be thinking probably the estimate that we gave, which would be like around 800 and a little bit more.
Oh, 800. Okay, and a little more, but not 100 metric tons more. Okay, so she probably went over as well. Okay.
By a
And-
bit. I don't think she did by a
Oh.
whole lot. And we knew when we were discussing as a group, we knew that small commercial, they were the most in need. So we needed to help them out and make sure that we were being fair.
Okay. So you were suspicious and, or at least, you knew that Shelby needed it. Okay. So for example, Joseph took 1,200 tons. Is this the largest harvest? Yeah, I think group 7 has the largest harvest.
Yes, group 10
Seven.
also has the same.
What's that? Oh, yeah, you're right. We have two groups here that the same number. And we'll start with 7 since I started with them anyway. Group 7, surely this isn't a surprise. You knew you were going to overharvest. Is that correct?
Nah, not necessarily.
No, this is a surprise to you.
Yeah.
Me too.
I mean, it look like me and Raina or right where we actually discussed, and Joseph and Aria went over what was discussed. But yeah,
All right, all right. So you're saying you and Rena, you stay true to your numbers, but Joseph and is it Aria, they went over?
yeah.
So, like for example, what did you think Joseph was going to harvest?
I believe the small commercial. I think small commercial had the largest harvest
Yeah,
discussed.
they were 880, and then large commercial was 670.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So these are
So
significant.
large harvest went almost double what was
Right,
discussed.
right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So Aria, how did you come up with 1,200? That's not your maximum harvest though, is it? I think your maximum harvest is like 1,400. Let me just double check. Yeah. So you're not maxing it out. How'd you come up with 1,200, Aria?
That was not my maximum, but I actually meant to put 1,000 just because I thought that made more sense for large commercial. But looking back at it, I definitely think maybe I would have done a different number.
Like what?
Probably a little bit lower.
Lower? Not higher.
No.
Yeah. Because you would have got a higher NPV going higher. You could have done 1,400.
That's true.
Yeah. So did you know Joseph was going to overharvest?
No, I did not.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason I was asking was because maybe you thought Joseph was going to overharvest, so you may as well overharvest as well. But that's not the case.
No, I mean, I assumed someone would overharvest, but I do think my number was a little bit high. But you're right. I think if I did 1,400, it would have been better.
Yeah, your number 1,200. You're not maxing out. Okay. You're making 17 million as your NPV, which is almost the highest in your group. Joseph, though, has you beat. So let's talk to Joseph. How'd you pick 1,200?
I had picked 1,200 because we had the highest profit margin for the shark.
Right.
So, everybody else had kind of led to be flexible. Well, I mean more of large commercial was flexible in comparing me and large commercial. So when everybody was, willing to come down, felt that it was the right move to make.
Did you tell them you needed more? Excuse me, I need a drink.
I did not know. And I had led with that, we felt that we were one of the most, important sectors here, that we really relied on it and the use for it. So that's kind of what I led with. And I felt like that really aligned.
Okay. How'd you pick 1,200? You could have done 1,300.
I could have. I didn't want to, go too high. I mean, there was respect there that we, discussed. So I felt that was a comfortable number to maintain, what small commercial was doing, but also not be too exploitive.
All right. So 1,200 was a little bit more respectful. And 1,300 would have been like sticking it in their eye type of thing. So 1,200 was better for you.
For me personally, yeah.
All right. All right. So this was a surprise. 3,350. And here, the collective doesn't do all that great, 63 million versus 70. But yet, Josephson PV is very high. In fact, it's not the highest of all the small commercials, but it's certainly the highest in his group. Let's take a look at ten. That's also 350. Did I add this up correctly? Yeah, it must be. So group 10, is that a surprise for you?
I don't think ours was a surprise. I remember at the beginning of the meeting, I wanted all of us for our numbers to equal 2,500, but then the group decided, we could have a little more. So I think everyone decided what numbers they wanted to equal, like the 33.
So is it a free-for-all then?
No, like I think everyone presented, and then I presented my number saying everyone can take a hit, and this equals 2,500. But then
You put
everyone
forth
else
some
decided-
numbers.
What? My numbers?
Yeah, you put forth some numbers for everybody.
Yeah, my original numbers for the group would have been like large 350, small 950, rec 500, and rec tours, or rec competition 500, and rec tours 700.
How much did you say for large commercial?
350.
Okay. And they didn't buy into these numbers.
No, they thought we had like wiggle room. So, and then the rest of the group decided how much they wanted to add, but my number actually never changed. So I just
At 950, right, right.
The 350 was a little bit too much of a haircut for me to take from 1,400 down to 350. So I thought I was
Yeah.
being singled out. So that was my somewhat of a compromise by giving up. I don't know. I gave up like 40% or somewhere 40, somewhere around there.
Right. No, that did sound pretty low, the 350. So you went up to 750. Is this, when you guys discussed it, was 750 what you said you were going to be doing?
I believe so.
All
I
right.
believe this. I don't think I think everybody followed what we said we were going to do.
Right.
Somewhere
Sounds like it was pretty sure you were going to overharvest, or everybody, that the group as a collective was going to overharvest. Everybody was just doing their own numbers then. Is that right?
There was some compromise. I know I compromised. I think originally I was at 1,000 or so fish, but we all kind of compromised for the most part by coming down a little bit. I think originally we were somewhere around like 4,200 total fish. I think if we added all our numbers, then we kind of agreed to come
Did you ever hit 2,500?
down a couple hundred pounds. Not that I recall.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So outside of Laura's proposal, 2,500 was never on the table.
I don't believe so. I mean, Laura was staying kind of firm at her numbers. Maybe she went down a little bit, but I don't believe so.
Okay. So, Emmett, what do you think is going on in group 8 or group 5?
I think, I don't know, 75 seems pretty low for Mary. It seems like a very big drop going from 1,400 down to 75. I mean, that's like a 95% decrease.
So what's going on here is Mary lost her sense of she's given up her NPV. What about group?
I wouldn't agree with that.
Oh, no, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you,
Okay.
Mary. Don't worry. We'll come back to you. So Emma, what do you think's going on in group 5?
It looks like commercial fishermen were very supportive of the competitive fishermen and the tours. It seems like they came out ahead in this negotiation overall. Especially Ethan did pretty well, keeping it at 833.
Yeah, Ethan has the highest harvest in that group. So something's going on there, right? Right. What about, and we'll talk to group 5 and 8 shortly, okay? So you'll have your chance to actually have your say. But everybody else, what do you think's going on in groups 5 and 8?
I believe that they actually were thinking about the general group and the numbers that they may have estimated. They stuck to it.
Right. So there's a couple of things. One, they were thinking about the total groups. They were maybe thinking, let's hit that 70 or the 2,500. But how'd they stick to it?
I think they were more confident about others, like the others are gonna stick with their number, like which was pre-decided. So that's what motivated them to stick with their numbers, and they didn't over harvest in their personal harvest.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is they were confident others would hold true, so they held true.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts?
I think for at least like the large commercial groups, I was also part of this group. So like where Mary and Allison would have been, it did make sense for the large to drop. I do know like people like myself and Emma did make like a big cuts, like almost 50%. But it did make the most sense because I don't know if everyone had access, but we like got other fish as well. It was like a year-round thing. Yes, our harvest would have been more because it was year-round fishing because of the equipment. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just sharks. It was also like tuna and other fish. So it does kind of make the most sense to make a significant like cut, like more in the 50% and lower the rather than some of the other groups, especially like some of those recreational tours, recreational competitive, because they don't have like the resources. So it makes more sense for them to take advantage of something, especially when this wasn't our like primary profit.
Right. So you understand Mary's dropping because you can move on. And you're saying you can sacrifice more than the other people can sacrifice. So why not do that? Okay. So maybe they made it clear that, large commercial, they have room to move. So maybe they should take the hits. Okay.
Yeah, it's a big drop, but like at the end of the day, it's not like our primary profit. So it wouldn't hurt us at the end of the day significantly.
Right. And Allison has 417. So that's a fairly low harvest as well. And Mary 75. Okay. All right. So Michelle, what makes you, what do you think is going on where they stuck to it versus, we saw a couple of groups here where they were at 2,500, but then when they were on their own, they over harvested.
I mean, honestly, I think that's kind of an ethics thing based off like Mary and Allison look like they decided to go with the group, come with the decision and cooperate. I think that's kind of more of like a personal decision. We went over as well, but we all like put the same numbers from what I can recall, as we said, similar to I think it was a group with Laura. We also decided that there was some wiggle room to slowly adjust to making it way. So hopefully by the next year we could reach 2,500. That was where like our thought process was.
All right.
So yeah.
Okay. All right, let's open it up now. Let's open it up to groups 5 and 8. And we'll start with Mary, because Mary wanted to speak up for herself earlier. So Mary, 75, that's the lowest harvest of anybody, let alone large. So what's going on?
I mean, I would agree with Michelle, and maybe it was the insight that wasn't provided to all the groups, but it's not like that was completely confidential information. That was something that we were able to discuss when it came to our meetings, that our profits didn't rely solely on shark harvesting. Initially, the way I did it in the Qualtrics was I just took the percentage that we each had of the total harvest, and that's the number I went into the group meeting with. But others in my group were able to like shed insight on like why that would affect the entire group poorly. And clearly, I think the overall point of this was if you go over, you are risking having no fish in the future. So I trusted in my group that we would stick with what we all decided, and yeah.
So you had no question others would hold true to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of like, I can't be honest if in a real life scenario I would do similar, but it was a discussion where we were like, okay, we know what we've been learning in class and we know about persuasion and behavioral decision making. But you know, if one of us screws another one over, we're all not going to have a success next year. So I trusted in my colleagues to do that.
Was that sort of salient with everybody? Everybody
Yeah,
had that thought
yeah.
that
For our group, yes. I kind of made like a percent change profits and like in total profits for each company, and that's kind of how we decided on our numbers. So like large commercial, for example, had a 14% drop in profits, while everybody else had a 30% drop in profits, and that's why we thought it was fair.
interesting. So you actually ran numbers on the percent drop in profit, and
Yeah.
doing that, Mary's actually taking the least hit.
Yes.
Okay, so everybody else taking a bigger hit, but even though Mary's taking a lower harvest, she's not taking as big of a hit.
Yeah.
And that's because she has other fish that Mary is harvesting. Okay, so you made that, you showed
Exactly.
everybody, and everybody bought into it.
Yeah.
And were you the one who generated that this is the numbers, these are the numbers everybody should do?
Yes.
Okay. So you had some type of like spreadsheet and stuff showing them the numbers.
In Excel, yes, I shared my screen.
Yeah. And for you, it was reduction in profit.
Yes.
Looking at. Okay. And everybody was taking, except for Mary, but everybody else was taking 30% cut.
Yes, 30.3 to be exact, and she was taking 14.2.
Okay. So Mary's doing better in that regard, and everybody else is all equal. That's very interesting. So people can buy into that, right? Because they see the math, they see the logic, and everybody's taking the same hit. And in fact, Mary's the only one who looks like they're coming out ahead in that by that logic. Okay. Yeah, I could see why people would like that. Okay.
Excuse me. Professor, I will say that another factor that at least influenced me was the fact that yes, we went over the numbers and everything together, and the presentation, it was actually quite nice, Jacob. I'm not gonna hold it. It was very well put together, but it wasn't super far off from my number that I, before we came to the meeting. It really wasn't so far off, and at the end of the day, it felt more like we need to make sure that we don't go over or else everybody's screwed. So it just kind of seemed like, okay, this is a plan that will work. It's not going to affect me that poorly. And everybody seems like we're good to go on this decision. And it was all very decisive. And it didn't take long at all. So I feel like I'm not going to say that Jacob was the leader or anything like that, because we did have a discussion. But the fact that we all seemed to be like, okay, this is the end goal. And we had the numbers to show for, like, to go through everything. And we all seemed to come out unscathed for the most part. It was just like, okay, this is just what we have to do. Let's do it. I was like, okay.
When you say the end goal, what are you talking about?
Well, to make sure that the total harvest wasn't
2,500
over that 2,500.
Okay. All right. And it sounds like you're saying it was also very salient that if anybody violated or went off this plan, it would screw everybody. And so that actually helped people stay in line.
But I will say that was more from the reading itself.
Right.
The opening.
Right out then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Did anybody threaten anybody else in any groups? All right. That does happen. Okay. Okay. All right. So we have a pretty good idea what's going on here. let's see what's going on in group 5. Group 5, you also came in at 2,500. Does it sound like a similar story, or is there something else going on with your group? So group 5, how did you come up with these numbers? Oh, and actually, look at that, 694.4, 833.33. Yeah, so there was something going on with these numbers.
So we were calculating based on the net present value of each of our types of businesses and the fish, the sharks that we catch.
Okay,
So the big cut for me, I was the Allison in large commercial, so it was big cut for me.
Yeah. But when you're looking at the NPVs, what were you looking at? Just to see if everybody had the same cut of NPV?
Sure, I can also add on for group 5. I was the Allison in small commercial. But we all came into the
Allison's
meeting
here.
we all came into the meeting very prepared. We all had read the general information case material that was provided. So we had a good idea of the backstory of each of the groups, as well as how the cuts would impact each of us. So we took the time to just briefly discuss that. And then we all ultimately came to the conclusion that the values that we were able to derive from the NPV profit formulas, those were pretty fair. So for our team, the discussion didn't really take that long. We were able to come to an agreement and trust each other that we would all put down the values that we had discussed in the meeting.
We
So,
all cooperated.
Yeah.
so like group 8, 2,500 was the goal.
Mhm.
That was never a question, was it?
No,
No.
we were gonna hit it.
It was just a question of spreading things out, how you would do the spread. So
Right.
how did you come up with these fraction numbers?
I follow the formula. So I literally stick with all the numbers and that's how it was like that. Yeah.
Okay. And you stuck with the numbers that plopped out of your calculations.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. We all each went around and shared the amount that we had gotten from the exact calculation. And we all agreed that that was the number that we were going to provide in the Qualtrics.
I rounded mine a little bit.
Let's see. So you're Alice in large commercial, right?
Yes.
And you rounded it from what to what?
It was a decimal. It was like
Your
from
decimal. So you were a decimal as well. Okay.
416.66,
All right.
something like that.
Well, these groups are actually exceptional, 2,500. Let me give you the stats, historical stats for the case. In a lot of the cases we do in this class, the data is collected or results are collected across multiple universities. At the MBA level, this is just on average, 1 in 10 will cooperate. So we are over that average in this class. We're about 2 out of 10. At DePaul, it's approximately 1 in 5. And so we're actually holding true to the DePaul average. It varies at school though, and I'll mention a couple other schools later on. But most social dilemmas, like Shark, they tend to end in failure, just like Prisoner's Dilemmas do. And so and the reason people study this in organizations is because this is without doubt the most common ethical situation people encounter in organizations. You see social dilemmas at all different levels. Budgets are a social dilemma. We'll start at a lower level. For example, you can easily understand how this might translate to a team. Do you look out for you and your performance, or do you look out for your team as a collective and their performance, right? Do you want to be the star, or do you want the team to take the credit? And so you have these social dilemmas even at the team level. You have social dilemmas, even some silly stuff. We share a common supply room in my department, And last year, I was short on these paper pads like this, just a normal paper pad. I would call our admin person and have them order some more pads, and I would get the email that they're in. I go get them, but they're not there. And so I email our admin person that we still need some pads because they're not there, puts in another order. I get the email they're in, and I go check on them, and they're still gone. Somebody's taking all those pads, probably for their personal gain for some reason, but then everybody else in the department, like me, suffers. Budgets, that's also a social dilemma. So many years ago, the DePaul doesn't do our budgets like this anymore, but we would, each college would get like a bucket of money or a lump sum. And then we as a college would decide on how to spread that budget money around. And we would always tell our chair, get the biggest share of that as you possibly can. And we didn't really care if marketing may have had some special needs or finance, maybe they needed a new center or something like this. Didn't care. We just wanted the most for us. Okay. And we were in a social dilemma. And we know it's a social dilemma, and we still say, let's get the biggest share we can. The social dilemmas are without question the biggest problem, ethical problem within organizations. But let me jump to the lecture notes real quick and sort of put all this in perspective. There they are. All right, so again, the topic, of course, is behavioral ethics. And this class is different than most ethics classes. In most ethics classes, you may look at some philosophical approaches, maybe even some legal approaches, and taking a look at maybe what's right versus wrong, that type of stuff. We're not doing any of that in our class. In fact, I throw in a definition of ethics just to have it in here, but we're not even going to look at this. But ethics is basically you follow a set of standards or some type of moral system. And if that's the case, if you have this belief about right from wrong and you follow what's right, you're ethical. But we're not even going to talk about that. And we're not going to talk about any of that stuff. We're looking at behavioral ethics, just studying about why people make the ethical decisions that they do. Sort of in the same vein that we look at decision making, how people actually make decisions, not what they should do, but what they actually do. And for us, we're going to look at in three different areas. Social dilemmas, which we already started. We're also going to take a look at this notion of fairness, because I saw the data in our class and we all pretty much want to be fair. And then I'll also throw in justice norms here. We've already covered it, but this also falls into this realm. And so I threw in the slide in this one too. Let's go back to social dilemmas. So this is just, we did the social dilemmas. They're just a prisoner's dilemma game with more than two people. Okay. And social dilemmas tend to be a little bit more risky than a prisoner's dilemma game because there's more players. And I'm going to come back to that. Let me give you a couple examples of social dilemmas. So the first one is Edney's Nut Game. And this one came about at USC. And this was one of the very first studies of social dilemmas at a business school. And what Edney had were these MBA students that sit around these bowls. And in the bowls it was filled with nuts. These are like metal nuts you put on the back of a bolt. And the MBA students, they were given the goal, the objective, to gather as many of these nuts as they possibly can. And there was a person there whose sole job it was to refill, basically double the number of nuts in this bowl every 10 seconds. Now, if you just think about this, not even for very long, you can quickly figure out you have a continual supply of nuts. So all you have to do is manage your withdrawal rate so that you have a continual supply. It keeps refilling, and you can have an unlimited supply of these nuts. But what Edney found was that more than half of these groups, these are MBA students, by the way, more than half of these groups didn't even reach the first 10 seconds. This was ridiculous, right? What explains this? Okay, but it's a social dilemma. People are just taking as much as they possibly can for themselves. And, forget about the rest. I'm just going to collect all these nuts that I can. Another example. This one's my favorite because it's mine. So I was the very first person who these people entering into an executive MBA program would see. And I wasn't teaching a class. My job was to talk to them about working as a study group. Because the way this program worked was they would come in to take classes. They'd fly in Thursday, they'd take classes Friday, Saturday, and half a Sunday. And they were assigned these study groups. And they would actually take every class with their study group. They would do group projects with their study group. They would write group papers with their study group. They would be with the study group for the entire duration, which was about 3 years. And so my job was to give the study group assignments and then talk to them about what it means to work together. So the first thing they do, and when they come in, they get their study group assignments, and then I give them an envelope. And this envelope is a $10 bill. And they have these instructions that I then give them, that if they're willing to contribute that $10 bill to the good of the group, and that's how it's phrased, the good of the group, then everybody in the group gets a $20 bill. And then I give them 30 minutes to talk about it. Sort of like you had time in Shark to talk about it before going off to harvest. They had time to talk about it as well before they would take their envelope. As they walk back in the room, they would toss their envelopes into this big old bucket. If they tossed in an envelope that was empty, that meant they kept the money. They pocketed it. And if they tossed in an envelope that had the $10 bill in it, that meant they gave it back to the group, the good of the group. Now, 5 out of the 7 would have to contribute in order for everybody to get 20. And I did this for about 6 years. Just take a wild guess. How often would you imagine that I had to pay out these $20 bills? Take a wild guess. Just blurt it out.
10% of the time.
10%. So something low. Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. It is low. It's 0%. Okay. And this is a measly $10. And these are some groups that they know they're going to be with one another for years. And even they won't be willing to contribute for the good of the group. They'll take the 10 themselves. Now, I will throw out there that some of them are gaming it. They're trying to get $30. Keep the 10 and try to convince everybody else to throw in their 10. So when the 20 comes, they have their 10 and they get a 20, and together it's 30. So some people try to game it, but it just doesn't work. This is a social dilemma. People look out for themselves. This is a measly $10. And these are people who can easily afford a lot more than $10. So they could give it away if they wanted. So social dilemmas are a big problem. If you find you're in one, watch out, because they tend to end in failure. Social dilemmas come in like 2 flavors. One of them is where you're taking stuff. That's what you did with Shark. It's a harvest. Okay. This is called a social trap. Now, things that are considered social traps are like the harvesting, of course. Pollution is considered a social trap because there's usually regulations about how much you can actually pollute. And if everybody over polluted, then we're in a world of hurt. And then there's social fences. And that's where you contribute things like taxes are considered a social fence. For me, committee work is a social fence because I get no reward, 0 reward for committee work. No increase in paid, no recognition for promotion or anything. But yet, if I didn't do committee work, our department would pretty much cease to function. And so this is something we contribute to for the good of the department. And so you can see there's 2 different ways to look at it. I should also mention that the case you did, Shark, it was actually paid for by the Cod Fishing Association. It's in the New England area. Cod fishing at one point was the #1 industry in New England. It wasn't very long ago. There are pretty much no cod anymore. I mean, they're still there. They're not extinct, but it's no longer a fishing industry for cod anymore. In the fishing industry for cod, they knew they were over harvesting. They knew they were over harvesting for years. They couldn't stop it, even though they knew they were over harvesting. And so they actually paid a group of researchers, I think Kim Wade Benzoni and Ann Ten Brunzel, I think, are the two leads, to write a case about what they went through in the hopes that it won't be repeated by other fishing industries. That this is the case that you just did, the shark case. Okay. And by the way, there are other industries that overharvested as well, like salmon in the Pacific Northwest and so forth. So it hasn't ended. Okay. But the case was designed to teach people so they could get out of this situation. But there are steps you could take to actually help out if you find yourself in a social dilemma. The key is to realize, hey, I'm in a social dilemma. And once you realize that, you could take steps to help alleviate or get people to cooperate more. Okay. I'll start off first by actually saying what doesn't work. Fines and punishment or threats. Those things have a short-term effect, not a long-term. Now, this case actually can get a little bit emotional. Sometimes people do give threats. Doesn't sound like this happened in this class. Or if it did, nobody was willing to speak up about it. But oftentimes you would hear things like, you better cooperate this time because next time I'll get you, okay, if you don't. But these things don't work. I think they have a very short-term effect. But here are the things that do work. You can make things personal, personalize it. People sacrifice themselves for a personal reason. Okay, like if I was Rec Tours, I might make the point. I got a kid in college. I have these high tuition bills. You can't put me out of business right now. You got to help me out. People will sacrifice for a personal reason like that. So personalize it. You can also publicize commitments. This is the technique, that was made famous by Jimmy Carter. I think I mentioned that. I hope I mentioned it in the video last week. It works on the consistency principle. And so Jimmy Carter would actually bring disputing parties, once they hammer out a deal, to the press and have them declare to the press, the world, what they agreed to, all in the belief that they would actually follow through with it if that's what they said they would do. It worked pretty well. And this is the publicizing commitment. So in this case, it would be like going around and everybody declaring what they are going to harvest once they go out to sea. I don't know if anybody did that, but if they did, if they harvested something different, they would feel a little uncomfortable.
Excuse me, Professor, I have a doubt for here. Like for publicizing in this harvest case, even if you harvest more from what's declared, in this case, I think nobody's gonna know if you over harvested. So how are we gonna overcome that?
Right. So you won't know, that's right. But if you stated when you're in your group to the group, I'm going to harvest X amount, or I'm going to harvest 800 metric tons. When you say that verbally, and then you go off in private to actually harvest a decision, if you find yourself harvesting something different, like maybe you want to harvest 1,000, you start thinking, wait a minute, I said 800, and you're going to feel uncomfortable. If you didn't say it at all, you put down 1,000, no problem. But you'll hesitate because you said something different. And that it's that hesitation or that uncomfortableness, it's cognitive dissonance, is what is behind this publicizing commitments. Let me get my pen. But you're right. However, building off that, if everybody could see what you write, like open communication, that also keeps people in line. Okay,
Yeah,
no
that's what I
hiding.
was-
Yeah, no hiding. Everybody sees everything, and then people will fall in line because nobody wants to be seen doing something like this.
Yeah.
And the psychological contracts or norms. The psychological contracts is a fancy name for a norm. Norms either have norms of cooperation or norms of competitiveness. So let me give you 2 examples of how norms work. Going back to the historical data on shark, some schools, MBA programs have a norm of extreme competitiveness. So for example, at the Harvard MBA program, all cases are graded. You don't have a grade for Shark, but there, Shark, you're assigned a grade. And there, one in 60 groups cooperate. So that means 59 groups over Harvest out of 60. At a school like Baylor University, which is in Waco, Texas, they try to put themselves forward as a teams school. So they push themselves as teaching team dynamics, all this other stuff. For them, they have this normal cooperation, and there it's 1 in 3 will cooperate. Okay, even more than here at DePaul. So you can see how norms can sort of set the standard for whether you cooperate or not. There's one other thing that's not on here because it's not officially part of the literature, but there's some suggestive stuff that comes out of psychology, which is physical touch may actually encourage cooperation too. Okay, so the primary example being a study done by serving staff. If anybody here was ever in the restaurant business and had to serve tables, that type of stuff, what they find is that when the waiter or waitress hands the bill to their client and touches them on the shoulder as they pass the bill to them, they will actually get a higher tip than somebody who simply passes the bill to them. So there's something about that physical touch that elicits more cooperation. Cooperation in this case being separating from your money, okay? You're more willing to separate from your money in that case. So that also is interesting. And the way you translate that into Shark, now you couldn't do this because we're sort of an online class, but when you finalize your decision, maybe you could shake on it. Okay, I'm gonna do 500. I'm gonna do 1,000, and then you should all shake on it. You know, have that physical contact. That would be sort of an example of what the physical contact stuff sort of suggests doing. But the key is, and here's sort of the trick, you got to say, I'm in a social dilemma here. And that's when you do these type of techniques. Because if you don't realize you're in a social dilemma, chances are you're not going to employ any of these things. So the trick is to realize it's a social dilemma. This is what I'm going to do to help out. All right. So let's switch gears a little bit. So we talked about social dilemmas. That's sort of the big learning today. Now let's talk about this idea of fairness, which also belongs in behavioral ethics. This is a huge one, actually. All right. So I want you to go back, I think it's 2 weeks now. I think it's 2 weeks, might be 3, to the questionnaire that you filled out at the very beginning of class. One of the questions was, how often do you try to be ethical or fair when making decisions? Okay. So when you think back, hopefully this sort of sparks some memories. So for our class data, the vast majority of you always want to be ethical and fair, 48% of you. And about 46% of you most of the time. That right there, always and most of the time, that's pretty much the entire class. Okay, that's like 95% of the class wants to be ethical and fair when they make decisions. So think about that, 95%. That's like almost everybody. So I put you to the test. And you might recall this question too. Hold on, I need to get my sheets. All right. So in this question, it was, imagine that a colleague of yours, another student, just worked for 7 hours and was paid a total of $250 for their time and effort. You on the other hand, you worked 10 hours, more than 7, right? So you worked 10 hours. And what do you feel your fair pay should be? So on average, our class is at about $381. Half the class actually got that question. The other half of the class got a slightly different version. They were told that you just worked for 7 hours and got 350. Let me read it out to you. Imagine that you just worked for 7 hours and were paid a total of $250 for your time and effort. A colleague of yours, another student, they worked for 10 hours. What do you think their fair pay should be? Okay, well, I think their fair pay should be $357. Okay. My fair pay for 10 hours, $380. Your fair pay, $357. What's fair for you is different than what's fair for me. I always deserve more. Always. So even though we all agree that we want to be fair, that 95% of us want to be fair and ethical pretty much all the time, it doesn't really help us come up with what's fair or not, right? This difference between the fairness for you and fairness for me, it's referred to as the egocentric bias in fairness. It's very predictable. I have never had this play out in any other way. And you can see it in other scenarios as well. People all agree on wanting to be fair. In fact, our class is very fair because the global standard about wanting to be fair, it's 85% want to be fair pretty much all the time. Our class, it's 95%. So we're even above sort of the global standard. But even we can't agree on what's fair. This is the problem with fairness. We all want to be fair, but we can't agree on what is fair. Which is why in a negotiation class, which we're not in, but if we were in a negotiation class, the general advice is don't even bring up fairness. It doesn't get you anywhere. You're better off spending your effort and time working on other strategies, because all you get from fairness, pushing a fairness strategy, is quick agreement. We want to be fair. We want a fair deal, but it doesn't help you get to a deal because people have different perceptions of it. It's egocentric. Here's another illustration of the egocentric bias in fairness. This one's a little bit harder to interpret. So everybody filled out this Qualtrics survey about what they thought was the fair harvest for everybody. And let me just walk you through some of them. So the self-fair is what each role thought about their own fairness. So for example, large commercial people, when they filled it out and they were saying what large commercial should get, large commercial people felt they deserved about 1,000 metric tons. But everybody else who filled out that questionnaire, when they look at large commercial, they say, well, large commercial, they deserve 878. In other words, here the trend is large commercial people, they think they deserve more than what everybody else thinks they deserve. That same pattern is true for every single role. Every single role thinks they deserve more than what everybody else thinks they deserve. This again is the egocentric interpretation of fairness at work. So remember 2 weeks ago when we talked about the heuristics, and the egocentric bias was without question the most powerful, the most predictable, and that many other biases fall out from that egocentric bias. Fairness, the egocentric bias in fairness is one of them. People slant fairness in their direction in their favor. And that's the problem with fairness when it comes to ethics. The other thing we're going to talk about is justice norms, but we've already talked about justice norms. You should have got that, I think, last week in that lecture that I posted. So I'm not going to go through here, but this is also classic behavioral ethics. All right, so what we covered today are the social dilemmas and the egocentric bias and fairness. And these are some of the big components of behavioral ethics, at least in the business world, okay? Any questions about any of those? Let me see how we're doing on time. 7:15. Oh, good, good. All right, so no questions on those? All right, all right. So I'm going to switch gears then, okay? I'm going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the nut and bolt issues of the class. And let me get my syllabus. And let me make sure this is the case, because this is my recollection. We did not cover the syllabus last time we were together. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's do that then. Let's go over the syllabus. All right. So by now, I imagine most everybody here has already read the syllabus. So I'm going to go over the highlights. And I'm actually going to start off on page 5. And my notebook for the class, which is right here, starts on page 5. This is what I put front and center, because this is the week by week blow of what's going on. You could do what I do and rip the syllabus apart and put page 5, I think, and 6. No, just page 5 at the very front. The things that are highlighted in bright yellow, those are the things where we meet in class. I didn't want red. Where we meet in class. So right now we're at the behavioral ethics area. Last time we were together, we did behavioral decision making. And I'll just combine a couple things. Sure how I can scroll. Lost my scrolling. Now I can scroll. Okay, I get it. All right. So so right now we did the behavioral ethics. Oh my gosh. Those blue things don't move. All right, we'll just deal with it. All right. Ignore the blue writing, okay? It will take me too long to figure out how to get rid of it, so I'm just going to talk straight through it. So we have this behavioral ethics component. That's what we just did. And while I'm here, before talking about the syllabus, let me just talk about what's coming up since we're right here. Next week, there's going to be 2 things to do. One is this new recruit case. We're going to talk about negotiations next time we're together. The new recruit case is a negotiation. And it will go out on Monday morning, and you'll have until Friday, 11:30 p.m. to turn it in. The new recruit case, I want to be clear on this one point. It's actually a job negotiation is what it is. There's a recruit and a candidate. But I want to make very clear that it's nothing like a real life job negotiation. Nothing like it. And if you treat it as if it was a job negotiation, you're probably not going to do very well. What the new recruit case really is a point maximization exercise. There are multiple issues. There are points attributed to each of these issues. You want to get as many points as you can. That's what the new recruit exercise is. All right, and each side has their own points. This goes out again on Monday morning, next Monday morning, and you'll have until Friday, 11:30 p.m. to turn it in. The other thing to do next week is this thing called a CAPSIM assessment. The CAPSIM assessment is something that's required for all people getting an MBA here at DePaul. And if you're not getting an MBA, but you happen to be in the 500 class, tough luck. You're going to have to do the CAPSIM anyway, because the 500 class is the vehicle that was decided to do the CAPSIM assessment. Now, the CAPSIM assessment, the reason why it's given is to give you objective feedback as to your managerial skills. When I say objective, it's somebody who really doesn't care about your future, doesn't care about you, right? So you're in my class, so I would care about you. Okay, you're a DePaul person, so I would care about your future. This is an assessment that's none of that. It's just an objective measure. Here's how you rank on your managerial skills with other MBAs, is what this is saying. Now, I'm not connected with Capson. Capson is a company. There is a fee attached to this. I think it's like 20 bucks. You look at that like a textbook fee. Okay, it's just something you're going to have to do. It'll open up on Monday as well. It'll be due by 11:30 p.m. on Friday. This CAPSM assessment is something that has to be done in one sitting. I'm not taking it, but my understanding, it takes anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes to actually complete. And because you have to do it in one sitting, you probably want to make sure you have an appropriate window open to complete this. So what happens if you don't do it is at the end of the quarter, I'll get an email stating so-and-so hasn't taken the CAPSM. You need to hold their grade. So in other words, you can't get a grade for the class unless you do the CAPSM. So do it. You'll get feedback on the CAPSM as well and how you do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next time we're together. So 2 things, CAPSM, new recruit, next week. All right, let's get back to the syllabus now. All right. Going to the top. So the fastest way to reach me is via email. You can reach me via phone as well, but email, you'll get a much faster response than my voicemail. Course objectives, class communication. We'll be doing a lot of cases. The way that this class is formatted, we'll do a case during our off week, what I call an off week, and then we'll do lecture or debrief of the case during our on week or the days we do our lectures. That generally will be the case. There'll be some variations to that. The reading materials, there's no textbook. All the reading material will be posted in D2L. There'll be book chapters, there'll be research articles. Today you have a book chapter. It's by Keith Merniam talking about social dilemmas. What's nice about Keith Merniam, he's both an expert in social dilemmas. This is one of his specialty areas, and he's one of the better writers in the field. So it'll be a pleasure to read that type of stuff. So the readings will get posted. Okay. Cases typically go out on Mondays. All right. This one I'll make a point. On your case material, we're on the honor code system here. So you only download your case, nobody else's. There's no way for me to control this. So we're on the honor code. I expect you just to look at your case material and not somebody else's. You can do anything you want with your case material except actually show it to the other side. Like this is the shark case. You can't show your material to the other side, but you can read and do anything else you want. You just can't physically show your case material to anybody else. And if this was an in-person class, I would also make the point that there should be no physical contact as well, because occasionally emotions rise high. And the reason I bring that up is just because we completed Shark. Shark is a case that has actually resulted in physical contact between people after the debrief, once they see what their fellow shark harvesters have done. Some of them get upset, emotions tend to rise. There might be an inclination to maybe reach out and perhaps strike someone, and occasionally that does happen. But fortunately, we're separated by these screens. All right, grading now. All right, let's just work down. Preparation, it's preparation and participation. Everybody starts off with a perfect score, okay? The way you lose points on participation is if you unexpectedly miss or don't participate in a case, okay? If that happens without some type of advance notice, like an email saying you're you're out of town and don't have internet or something like this, you will lose half your points. It happens twice, you'll lose all your points. Okay. So there's a severe penalty for missing a case. Now, the reason why you have a severe penalty is because if you miss a case, chances are somebody else doesn't get to have that experience as well. With advance notice, I'll sort of jigger things around to maximize everybody's learning. But like even today, and this was it wasn't a person missing on purpose. Somebody just dropped, and it wasn't expected. There wasn't advance notice. And so this group wasn't able to actually fully participate like I would have liked them to. But with advance notice, I can sort of move things around. And that's why there's a severe penalty for missing without notice. Now, you see the syllabus, the week by week. That was page 5. If you know you're going to be out, just shoot me an email, okay? As long as I have advance notice, you won't have any penalty, because then I'll just rearrange the pairings and stuff so as to maximize learning. There might still be occasions when somebody is out because we have an odd number. There's nothing to do about that, but we can try to avoid these unexpected people being out. That's the participation part. This should be an easy one. Everybody should get 100% participation. 2 quizzes. We'll talk more about them as they come up. They typically are a mix of multiple choice and short essay answer. I'm actually surprised I have these weighted the same. I usually weight the first one a little heavier. The first quiz has more material in it than the second quiz. That's because this course is front loaded. We cover a lot more material in the first half than we do the second half. The first half is actually rather packed. The final case analysis, this is actually a paper. 3-page paper at maximum. It can be less. What I want you to do is, as we cover, I don't want you to start working on this now, but as we cover different topics, like we covered decision making, then there's ethics, there's negotiations coming up, we're talking about groups, talking about teams. What I'd like you to do for your paper is pick one of these topics and relate it to an actual experience that you had to deal with. And then put it in the framework of what we talk about in class. So for example, in the decision making, maybe there was a big decision that you had to make, okay, about whether to go back to school, whether it's about a job, whether it's about who your significant other is. There are many decisions that people make in life. And you probably didn't think about all the different biases that could come into play. And I fell victim to confirmation theory, okay, or I fell victim to prospect theory and how it was framed. I thought I was going to be losing everything, so I took the risk, that type of thing. You probably didn't think about it that way. So this purpose of this is to take your real life experience in one of the topics we talked about and put it in the framework that we talk about in class. So decision making, it would be like the heuristics or the biases, okay? And then the ethics, maybe you were in a social dilemma, okay? And next week is negotiation. Maybe you had a big negotiation. Then you can talk about in the framework that we'll talk about next time we're together. And this is more of how this class relates to something that you did personally. It's a maximum 3 pages, double spaced. We'll talk more about that probably after we do the groups. Okay, so we're still about 3 weeks out before I'll say maybe you want to start thinking about writing this, but you don't need to start writing it now. We're still too early in the class. That CAPSIM, this is the outside assessment. That's the CAPSIM. Just do it. All right. I mean, you won't get a grade if you don't do it. So, and it's basically you do it, you get the 10%. Otherwise, you don't get a grade. So that's one you just want to do. Oh, and that's it. Questions about the syllabus?
Could I ask you a question, sir, about an attendance related question I was going to ask you after, but figure maybe other people are thinking it as well. So,
sure.
So I know that I'm going to be out for our class the second week of May.
So I'll be out the country for work. What do you want us to do in those situations? Do you want us to email you, or I want to make sure that I can do everything I can for the participation piece and stay involved. So what's some of your thoughts on that?
So definitely email me if you know you're going to be out. In fact, email me tonight, because if you know you're going to be out at that point, just email me and then I'll put it in my records. And there won't be any attendance hit if I have that advance notice. Now, if you're missing a case, then I'll rejigger the pairings. But if you're missing an actual lecture, fortunately, if I remember to do it, I hit that record button. And so you'll always be able to catch the recording at your convenience, okay? And if anybody ever catches me forgetting that, hit that record button, mention it, right? Because we do want to get it recorded for people who miss it. And then the readings are also on D2L as well. So you can catch up later on at your leisure.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Do you want us to put the class section header in our email when we reach out to you?
No, you just put down, management 500 and get the date and that type, not the date in the header, but in your email, give me the date you'll be out.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, Professor, what will be the format of quiz 1?
Yeah. So I haven't made it yet. But most likely quiz 1 will have mostly probably short essay answers. And when I say that, I mean, I'm going to throw out a situation. Like I'll throw out a situation and I'll ask you, so what decision-making bias did this person just fall victim to? Or another situation where I can't think of one right now, but the short essay answers will be ask you to apply what we learned to a novel situation. And then there'll be multiple choices, but there probably won't be too many of them. And the multiple choices just be rote type, almost memory. But seeing how this is an open book type of class, when it comes to the quizzes, those should be easy peasy. But it'll be mostly short essay and multiple choice. When I say short essay, I'm talking, you can answer it probably in 3 to 5 sentences.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Other questions?
Are the quizzes mainly going to be like on lectures and PowerPoints and like the actual like assignments we did, like the shark and other things like that? Or is it going to include, because I know there's like suggested readings and it's like books. Are those going to be included?
So none of the exercises we do are included on the quiz. Those are just purely for experiential reasons and also to set up the lecture so people can actually connect to it a little bit better. What'll be on the quiz will be the lectures that we have. That'd probably be the primary, and the readings as it pertains to the lecture. So what I mean by that is there'll be nothing from the readings on the quiz that we haven't covered in class, but the readings also reinforce though some of the things that we cover in class. So it helps you understand it a little bit better. And the readings also have other material as well, but it's the reinforcement that the readings are good for. Anything I put down as an optional read, those are completely optional. You don't have to read those unless you have the desire to do it. Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to actually stop my share screen so I can see everybody. Ah, that's much better. All right. Any other questions? All right, let me check the time. All right. One last round for questions, then I'm going to let you go because I held you a little bit over. Last chance. Okay, so next week on Monday, you're going to get new material going out, the CAPSIM, and also that new recruit case. Turn them in by Friday, 11:30 p.m., and then we'll meet 2 weeks from now, okay? All right. Everybody have a good night, and I'll see you then, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Recording